A frantic voice cuts through the static of a dying world. This is Earth's final transmission, a desperate message hurtling into the void. We discover we are not alone in the universe, but we are the last. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the profound secret hidden within humanity's last words and witness the birth of a new cosmic legacy. What was the true purpose behind this final broadcast? And who, or what, was it truly meant for? What would you sacrifice to ensure your story was never forgotten? A piercing chime shattered the endless quiet of his dreams. Dr. Aris Thorne gasped, his lungs burning as the cryo-fluid drained from his pod. The sterile, recycled air of the Odyssey stung his nostrils, a harsh welcome back to consciousness. His mind, still thick with the fog of suspended animation, struggled to place the frantic red lights flashing across the bridge. Then a calm, synthesized voice cut through the disorientation. It was Kronos, the ship's artificial intelligence. Dr. Thorne, an urgent broadcast has been received and prioritized. Source, Earth, it is the final transmission. Before Aris could form a question, the audio filled the chamber. It was a cacophony of desperation, a chorus of voices layered over collapsing infrastructure and screaming winds. He heard scientists, engineers, world leaders, all speaking at once, their messages overlapping into a single, horrifying dirge. They spoke of atmospheric failure, of a sky turning to fire, of a silence that was coming for them all. And then, the very last thing embedded in the data stream, a single, repeating sequence, a set of celestial coordinates. Kronos displayed the numbers against the star chart. The location was in a sparse, uncharted region of the Orion Arm. Aris felt the blood drain from his face as he cross-referenced the Odyssey's own position. The calculation was undeniable. "We are the only vessel within range," Kronos stated, its tone impossibly neutral. The nearest other human outpost would not receive this signal for another 3 centuries. The weight settled upon him then, a physical pressure on his shoulders. He was not just a scientist awakening early from a long voyage. He was the sole inheritor of a dead world's last whisper. Billions of lives, an entire history of art and conflict and love, had been reduced to this one final act. This one desperate piece of data cast into the dark. And he was the only soul close enough to hear its echo. The coordinates were not just a point on a map. They were a question, and Aris Thorne, alone in the void, was now the only answer humanity would ever get. The silence that followed the transmission was more deafening than the chaos itself. Aris stared at the oscillating wave patterns on the main display, his mind reeling. It was not a simple message. The signal was a dense, multi-layered data stream, a digital iceberg where the desperate voices were merely the tip. "Kronos," he said, his own voice a raw whisper. "Parse it, show me everything." The ship's intelligence began its work, its processing power unraveling the compressed information with silent, terrifying efficiency. It was an archive, a complete record of human knowledge, from the first cave paintings to the final equations of theoretical physics, all woven into a single, impossibly dense packet of light and code. It was a library of a dead species, a gift meant for someone, anyone, out in the dark. But buried within that gift was a warning, a stark, repeating phrase that chilled Aris to his core. "The Devourer comes, do not follow the path." He played the phrase again, listening to the cold, synthesized voice that delivered it, a voice stripped of all the human fear that had preceded it. "What path?" Aris demanded, his fists clenching. Kronos responded by overlaying the signal's embedded coordinates onto the star chart. "The path is clear, Doctor." The coordinates led directly into the heart of the Ghost Nebula, a vast, swirling cloud of dust and ionized gas that had long been a navigational hazard and a graveyard for probes. Every automated scout humanity had ever sent into that region had simply vanished. their signals cutting out without a trace. It was a place of cosmic silence, a void within the void. And Earth's last act was to point directly into its center. The archive was a treasure, but the warning was a riddle wrapped in a mystery. Why send a map to a place you explicitly forbid anyone to go? Why pack a starship with the sum total of your civilization's wisdom only to tell its pilot to turn away from the only destination that mattered? Aris understood then that his mission had fundamentally changed. He was not just a messenger boy for a dead world. He was standing at the edge of a cosmic precipice, holding a key in one hand and a locked door in the other, with a ghost whispering in his ear not to turn it. A flicker of light erupted from the main console, coalescing into the translucent form of a woman. Her face was etched with a profound exhaustion, her eyes holding a sorrow that seemed to span the light years. Aris stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. He recognized her immediately from the archival records, Dr. Elara Vance, the architect of the final broadcast. Her holographic lips parted, and a voice, calm yet urgent, filled the bridge. Aris, if you are hearing this, the failsafe worked. The words were meant for him personally. She knew someone would come, and she knew it might be him. The key is in the silence between the stars. Find the listeners. Her image dissolved into a shower of digital static, leaving the bridge feeling emptier than the void outside. Aris stood frozen, the echo of her command hanging in the air. The listeners. It was not a term from any official record, not a designation for any known species or organization. It sounded like a myth, a whisper from an old spacer's tale, and the key was in the silence. How do you search for something defined by its absence? Chronos, he said, his mind racing. Analyze that holographic data stream. Is there anything else? Any residual code or a carrier signal we missed? The AI responded after a moment of processing. The hologram was a ghost, Doctor. A self-contained data packet buried so deep within the transmission it was virtually undetectable. It activated only when the primary archive was fully decrypted. There is no further data. No coordinates, no definitions, only the message. Aris began to pace the length of the bridge, the soft hum of the life support systems a constant reminder of his isolation. Ilara had not just sent a warning, she had sent a puzzle, and she had addressed it to him. She knew he would understand the context, that he would grasp the significance of a signal hidden in plain sight. The archive was the obvious message, the grand gift for any hypothetical alien civilization. The warning was the caution sign, meant to deter the unworthy. But this, the ghost in the machine, this was the real mission. It was a whisper meant only for human ears, for a mind that could understand the subtlety of her phrasing. The silence between the stars was not just empty space. It was the background radio silence, the cosmic static that everyone else filtered out. And the listeners, they were not just someone who heard. They were the ones who paid attention to the quiet parts. He turned back to the star chart, his eyes fixed on the ghost nebula. Every probe sent there had gone silent. Their signals had not been jammed or destroyed. They had simply stopped transmitting, absorbed by an immense, unnatural quiet. That was the silence Ilara meant. The nebula itself was not a barrier. It was a destination. It was the place you went to listen. The Odyssey's engines thrummed to life as Aris input the new course. He was no longer just following a set of coordinates. He was chasing a ghost and a riddle, heading directly into the one place his entire species had been warned to avoid. Armed with nothing but a dead woman's faith and a key he did not yet know how to use. The silence Ilara spoke of was not an empty void but a canvas. Aris had Chronos filter out the desperate human voices, the crackle of dying cities, even the structured data of the archive itself. What remained was the barest whisper of the broadcast, the raw carrier signal that had traveled across the light years. He amplified it, listening to the hiss of cosmic static, a sound like a distant ocean. And there, buried so deep it was almost part of the fabric of space itself, was a pattern. A faint, rhythmic pulse, a ghost in the machine. It was a distress call, so distorted by time and distance it was nearly unrecognizable. Kronos identified the signal's origin signature, a string of numbers and letters that made Aris' heart skip a beat. Helios Station. The name was a legend, a ghost story told by deep space engineers. A state-of-the-art research outpost sent to study the fringes of the Ghost Nebula decades before the Odyssey's mission. It had vanished without a trace, its silence one of the first great mysteries that made the nebula a forbidden place. Officially, it was a tragic loss, presumed destroyed, but this signal told a different story. It was weak, yes, frayed at the edges like a worn-out tape, but it was persistent. It was not a final, explosive burst of data from a dying station. It was a repeating loop, an automated SOS that had been broadcasting long after Earth itself had fallen silent. The implications crashed over him. If Helios Station was still broadcasting, even weakly, it meant its power core, its essential systems, had survived whatever initial catastrophe had silenced it. It meant the station's structure might still be intact, a frozen tomb or perhaps a sanctuary. Could someone have survived out there, isolated in the dark, while the rest of humanity perished? Were they still there, waiting for a rescue that would never come from a home that no longer existed? This changed everything. The coordinates from Earth pointed to the nebula. Ilara's ghost spoke of listeners within the silence, and now, this echo from the past proved that something, some fragment of his own kind, might already be there, holding a piece of the puzzle. The Odyssey was not just heading toward a mystery. It was answering a call that had been crying out in the dark for generations, a call that now felt like a thread connecting him to the last flicker of human life in the universe. The starfield ahead began to warp and dissolve, swallowed by a wall of shimmering dust. The Ghost Nebula was not a distant cloud but a physical presence, a silent, churning ocean of violet and deep gray that blotted out the stars behind it. The Odyssey shuddered as it hit the boundary layer, the gentle hum of the ship's systems faltering for a heart-stopping moment. "Doctor," Kronos announced, its voice cutting through the low roar of stressed metal. "Long-range sensors are offline. We are effectively blind beyond a few thousand kilometers. Intense gravitational shear detected along the periphery. Anomalous energy readings do not match any known stellar phenomena." Aris's hands flew across the navigation console, his knuckles white. The automated pilot was useless here, its algorithms designed for the predictable emptiness of open space, not this chaotic, living barrier. He had to take the stick. On the main viewer, a path began to form, not a clear tunnel but a faint, writhing thread of slightly less dense gas that Kronos projected in a flickering green line. It was a navigational nightmare, a corridor of calm woven through a storm of invisible forces. He could feel the ship groaning in protest as he guided it into the passage. It was like trying to steer a leaf down a raging river. Every correction a fight against currents that wanted to crush them against walls of swirling dust. The gravitational shear pulled at the Odyssey's hull, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the ship's very soul. He had to rely on instinct and the raw data feed, his eyes darting between the viewport and the console, seeing the nebula not as a cloud, but as a living, breathing entity that tested his every move. One miscalculation, one moment of hesitation, and the silent nebula would claim another victim, adding the Odyssey to its collection of ghosts. He was not just flying a ship. He was navigating the throat of a cosmic beast, and its silence was the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. A shape coalesced from the swirling violet dust, a geometry that defied the ship's own utilitarian design. It was a vessel, but not one built by human hands. Its hull was a lattice of interlocking crystalline facets, catching the faint light of the nebula and refracting it into 1,000 shimmering colors. It made no sound, no aggressive move. It simply emerged from the void and fell into a perfect parallel course with the Odyssey, matching its speed and every slight adjustment Aris made at the helm. His breath hitched. Chronos, he managed, his voice tight. Analysis. The AI was silent for a long moment, its processors working at a capacity Aris had never seen. Unknown material composition. No energy signatures consistent with weapons or propulsion. It appears to be riding the same gravitational currents we are. Then the crystalline ship began to communicate. A series of intricate, shifting patterns of light played across its surface, beams of pure color weaving together in a silent, hypnotic dance. It was beautiful and utterly alien. Chronos attempted a translation, but its algorithms, built on every human language and scientific code, failed completely. The patterns are not a symbolic language in any known sense, Doctor. They appear to be a direct representation of complex mathematical concepts, perhaps even a depiction of the local space-time geometry itself. It was not trying to talk. It was trying to show them something. Aris watched mesmerized as the light patterns shifted, illustrating the very gravitational tides he was struggling to navigate. The alien ship was not a threat. It was a guide. A profound realization settled over him. This was a listener. This was what Elara Vance had sent him to find. They were not hiding in the silence. They were the silence. Their entire mode of existence, their very language, was built upon perceiving the subtle forces of the universe that humanity was only just beginning to measure. They communicated not with words, but with the fundamental music of physics. The vessel pulsed with a soft, blue light, a single beam extending from its core to trace a path deeper into the nebula, a route that was far clearer and safer than the one Chronos had projected. The listeners had been aware of the Odyssey's struggle, and they had come to help. They had been listening all along, not just to the stars, but to the one human ship, brave or foolish enough to enter their domain. A new frequency of light pulsed from the crystalline vessel, a complex cascade of gold and indigo. Chronos immediately flagged a correlation. The patterns are not random, Doctor. The dominant frequencies align precisely with the harmonic structure of audio files contained within Earth's final archive. It was not a map of space-time this time. It was a question. Aris, his heart hammering against his ribs, scrolled through the archive's cultural database. He bypassed countless speeches and scientific formulas, his fingers hovering over a file simply labeled Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It felt like a desperate, almost foolish choice, a message in a bottle cast into an alien ocean. He opened the file and transmitted the first, iconic 4 notes. The sound, a stark declaration of human genius, echoed through the Odyssey's bridge and out into the silent nebula. For a long moment, nothing happened. The alien ship hung in the void, its surface dark. Then, a single point of light ignited at its core. It pulsed once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, a perfect visual echo of the symphony's opening motif. Then it began to build, weaving the simple rhythm into an intricate tapestry of light, translating the entire musical phrase into a silent, shimmering performance of its own. The colors swelled and danced, mirroring the emotion and structure of the human composition with an accuracy that was breathtaking. It was not just a repetition. It was an interpretation, a conversation. They were not just hearing the music. They were feeling it, understanding its mathematical soul and its emotional heart. A fragile bridge had been built not from words but from shared resonance. Aris had answered their question, and in doing so, he had proven that humanity's final gift was not just a collection of data, but a library of feeling. He had given them a piece of our soul, and they had reflected it back, transformed into light. In that silent, radiant exchange, he understood that the listeners had not been waiting for a scientist or a soldier. They had been waiting for a musician. The silent symphony of light faded, leaving the crystalline ship glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. Then its surface rippled and a new pattern emerged, not a complex dance this time, but a stark, singular image. A three-dimensional star map resolved in the space between the two vessels. It was a map of the ghost nebula itself, but rendered with a clarity the Odyssey's blinded sensors could never achieve. A single point near the nebula's core pulsed with a gentle, golden light. An invitation or a destination. Without another signal, the alien vessel turned, its facets catching the light as it began to glide smoothly down the very path it had just charted, expecting them to follow. Aris stared at the receding ship, then at the new course now overlaid on his own navigation console. Chronos broke the heavy silence. The projected path leads into a region of intense gravitational lensing and spatial distortion. My analysis of their vessel's behavior suggests a high probability of advanced, non-hostile intelligence. However, the strategic calculation remains. Following an unknown entity into an unmappable region, based on a communication we barely understand, carries a 47% probability of being a trap. 47%. The number hung in the air, a cold, numerical representation of his dilemma. He could turn back now, carry the archive away from this silent graveyard, and try to find another way to fulfill Earth's legacy. But that felt like a betrayal of everything he had learned. Elara Vance had hidden a message for him within the static, pointing him toward the listeners. They had not attacked. They had communicated in the only language they seemed to know, the language of physics and art. They had appreciated Beethoven. Was that the action of a species laying a trap? Or was it the cautious, beautiful gesture of a being just as isolated as he was? He thought of the desperate, crackling voices from Earth's final moments, the terror in their last words. He thought of the ghost of Elara Vance, her face etched with a sorrow that demanded action, not retreat. The archive in his ship's memory was a monument, but it was a monument to the past. What the listeners offered was a path forward, a chance to understand not just what humanity was, but what it could become in a universe that was not empty, but full of silent, watching minds. The Odyssey's engines thrummed as he pushed the throttle forward, aligning the ship's nose with the course left by the crystalline guide. The 47% chance of a trap was a risk. But the 100% certainty of failure if he turned away was a fate he could not accept. He was going to follow the music into the dark. The path the listener carved through the nebula opened into a cavernous void, a bubble of stillness in the swirling dust. And there, suspended in the eternal night, was a graveyard. The Odyssey drifted past the skeletal remains of starships, each more bizarre and alien than the last. A vessel that resembled a colossal, fossilized sea urchin, its spines broken and drifting. Another that was a tangled web of organic-looking tubes, now frozen and brittle. A third was a perfect, smooth sphere, its surface scarred by some unimaginable force. Dozens of them, hundreds, a silent armada of the dead. These were not human designs. Each ship was a testament to a unique biology, a different path of evolution and technology, all brought to the same final end. They floated in the silent cathedral of the nebula, their hulls picked clean of any power source, any life sign, any hint of what they once were. This was the proof. This was what Elara Vance had tried to warn them about. The Devourer was not a myth. It was a historical fact, a predator that had been hunting among the stars long before humanity ever looked up at the night sky. The sheer scale of the graveyard was a physical weight on Aris' chest. How many civilizations had been snuffed out? How many stories, how many symphonies and works of art had been lost to this silent, cosmic consumer? The listeners had led him here not to frighten him, but to show him the truth. They were the curators of this museum of extinction, the silent witnesses to a horror that repeated itself across the eons. The Devourer did not conquer. It consumed. It left behind only hollow shells as monuments to its endless hunger. And now, with Earth's final broadcast, humanity had added its own voice to the chorus of the lost. We had become just another exhibit in this gallery of ghosts. The crystalline ship pulsed once, a soft gold, and then dissolved back into the shimmering dust, its purpose fulfilled. Before the Odyssey floated Helios station, but it was not the derelict tomb Aris had expected. The familiar, angular architecture of the human outpost was encased in a perfect, shimmering sphere of energy, a soap bubble of iridescent light holding the void at bay. It was breathtaking, a jewel box protecting a relic of a lost age. "Chronos, run a full scan," Aris whispered, his voice hushed with awe. The AI responded instantly. The energy field is non-hostile, a stable containment barrier of unknown origin. It is permeable to our scans, and Doctor, I am detecting life signs. Human life signs, the word struck him with the force of a physical blow. They were not ghosts or echoes, they were people. Men and women who had gone to sleep in a universe where Earth was a living, breathing world, and had awoken to find themselves the last of their kind. The station's internal atmosphere was stable, power readings minimal but steady. They were in stasis, Chronos continued. The field is not just a shield. It is a perfect preservation matrix, suspending them in a single moment of time. The listeners had not just found Helios station. They had saved it. They had found this lone outpost of humanity, on the verge of succumbing to whatever silent threat haunted this nebula, and they had wrapped it in a cocoon of energy, protecting it from the Devourer, from time itself. This was not a graveyard, it was an ark. The desperate SOS they had detected was not a final, dying gasp. It was a beacon that had been answered, not by its creators, but by the silent curators of this galactic museum. The listeners had gathered the artifacts of dead civilizations, but for humanity, they had done something different. They had performed an act of preservation. They had seen a species on the brink and chosen to save a seed, to keep one flicker of human life burning in the dark. Aris guided the Odyssey closer, the ship passing through the energy field with only a faint, tingling sensation. He was no longer just a recipient of Earth's final message. He was now the inheritor of its last living children. The weight of that responsibility settled upon him, a profound and terrible honor. He had found the listeners, and in doing so, he had found the one thing he never dared to hope for: a future. The energy field shimmered before the Odyssey's viewport, a perfect silent barrier. Aris studied the sensor data, his mind racing to find a key. Then he saw it, a correlation so simple it was genius. Chronos analyzed the shield's resonant frequency. Compare it to the carrier wave of Earth's final transmission. The eye processed the request in an instant. They are identical, Doctor, a perfect harmonic match. The shield was not just a random energy field, it was a lock, and Earth's last broadcast was the key. The listeners had not merely saved Helios station. They had sealed it with a password, a piece of human culture itself, ensuring that only someone carrying the legacy of the lost world could gain entry. Aris's hands flew across the communications console. He rerouted power from non-essential systems, focusing the entire output of the Odyssey's main transmitter. He was not sending a new message. He was playing back the original, desperate chorus of his species, amplifying its raw, carrier signal and aiming it directly at the shimmering dome. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the field reacted. The iridescent surface rippled like a pond struck by a stone. The chaotic voices of a dying Earth, the crackle of fire and static, resonated with the shield, and it began to part. A swirling vortex of light opened in the energy wall, a temporary gateway just large enough for a shuttle to pass through. It was a path forward, but it was also a race against time. The transmission was finite. Once it ended, the gateway would seal, perhaps forever. Aris did not hesitate. He sprinted from the bridge to the shuttle bay, his boots echoing in the empty corridors. He bypassed the standard pre-flight checks, his focus singular. This was not a scientific survey. It was a boarding action, a desperate plunge into the unknown. The shuttle's engines whined to life as he sealed the hatch, his eyes fixed on the shimmering tear in the fabric of the shield. He was about to cross a threshold no human had ever crossed, to step inside a bubble of preserved time and meet the last survivors of his kind. He was going to wake the sleepers. The shuttle's airlock hissed open onto a silence so profound it felt like a physical substance. Helios station's interior was a frozen diorama of human life, preserved with an eerie perfection. A thin layer of dust motes hung motionless in the air, caught in the sterile light of emergency strips. Crew members sat at their stations, their faces peaceful in stasis, hands still hovering over controls they had touched decades ago. Aris moved through the ghost ship, his footsteps the only sound until he found the command center. There, one pod was already open, its occupant standing by the main viewport, her back to him. She turned slowly, her eyes clear and sharp, holding a weariness that mirrored the ghost of Elara Vance. "I am Commander Eva Rostova," she said, her voice steady despite the centuries she had slept through. "We have been waiting for you, Aris Thorne." She gestured to the frozen crew around them. "We are the last, the final contingency." The transmission from Earth was not just a message. It was a beacon and a weapon. Aris felt the world tilt around him. A weapon, Rostova's gaze was unwavering. Its primary purpose was not to inform but to conceal. The data stream, the archive, the voices of the dying, it was all a shield, a piece of cosmic chaff. We knew the Devourer hunts by tracing the electromagnetic signatures of advanced civilizations. It follows the noise. So Earth's last act was to create the loudest, most complex, most distracting noise in human history, and broadcast it in every direction. It was a grand diversion, a flare shot into the sky to draw the predator's gaze away from this single, silent point. The coordinates buried within were not for any alien listener. They were for one of our own deep-range vessels, for a ship like yours, carrying the key to this lock. You were not just meant to hear the message, Aris. You were meant to see through it, to understand that the truth was not in the signal, but in the silence it was designed to create. The beacon was the weapon, and the weapon hid the only life we had left. And it guided the one person who could complete the circuit, the one person Ilara trusted to understand her ghost in the machine, you. The listeners are not saviors in the way we might hope. Rostova's voice was low, her eyes fixed on the frozen stars beyond the viewport. They are archivists, curators of the dead. For eons beyond our comprehension, they have witnessed the rise and fall of empires across the galaxy, and they have developed a single, sacred purpose. They record the final moments of a civilization, its art, its science, the very essence of its soul, just before it is extinguished. They do this for every culture the Devourer targets. They are the universe's memory, a silent library of ghosts. They do not fight. They do not intervene. They simply listen and remember, and the Devourer, Aris. "What is it?" Aris asked, the word feeling like ice on his tongue. Rostova turned, her face grim. "We never saw it, not directly. Our long-range sensors in the nebula only ever detected its shadow, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself. It is not a fleet. It is not a monster you can shoot. It is a predator that moves between dimensions, a cosmic parasite that feeds on the energy of consciousness, on the complex electromagnetic signature of a thriving technological culture. It doesn't just destroy worlds. It consumes them, draining every thought, every dream, every song until there is nothing left but silent, empty matter. It leaves the physical structures behind, like the husks in the graveyard outside, but it devours the soul. Earth, with its burgeoning global network, its trillions of connected minds, was a beacon. A feast, we were its latest target. The listeners arrived in our system just as the end began. They recorded our final broadcast, our desperate, chaotic symphony. And in that act, they fulfilled their purpose. They preserved our story, but for us, for Helios Station, they did something different. They broke their own ancient rule of non-interference. Why? Aris whispered, the question hanging in the frozen air. Why save you? Rostova offered a sad, fragile smile, because of the message, because of what Elara Vance hid inside the noise. She didn't just send a distress call. She sent a plea for understanding, wrapped in our greatest art and our deepest science. She showed them that humanity understood more than just power. We understood beauty. We understood pattern and emotion. The listeners who communicate through the fundamental music of physics heard a kindred spirit in our symphonies. They saw a spark worth saving from total annihilation, so they hid us here in this bubble of silence, using the Devourer's own hunting methods against it. The predator follows the noise, so they wrapped us in perfect quiet, making us invisible, and they left a lock on the door that only a human carrying the key to that noise could ever open. You were not just a rescuer, Aris. You were the final part of their preservation protocol, the proof that our story was not yet over. Rostova's hand trembled slightly as she keyed a command into the frozen console. A small screen flickered to life, revealing a face Aris had only seen as a ghost. Dr. Elara Vance looked directly into the recorder, her expression stripped of all pretense, her eyes holding a terrifying resolve. The log was private, never meant for the archive. I have analyzed the Devourer's resonance signature, she began, her voice low and steady. It doesn't just feed on consciousness. It is a form of consciousness, a distributed entity existing in a higher dimensional state. It can't be fought, but it can be disrupted. I have woven a counter-frequency into the transmission, a resonant pattern designed to collapse its cohesive field. It is a weapon, but broadcasting it requires a power source on a planetary scale, a sacrifice. The image of Ilara seemed to waver, a crack finally showing in her composure. She took a slow, deliberate breath. I am routing the broadcast through the planetary core, overloading the geothermal taps. It will trigger a chain reaction. It will shatter the world. Tell Aris, tell him I am sorry. The screen went dark. The silence in the command center was absolute. Aris felt the air leave his lungs. He had wondered for so long about the purpose behind the frantic, chaotic nature of the final broadcast. He had thought it was noise designed to hide a secret. He was wrong. It was a bullet. The archive, the voices, the art, all of it was the casing, the delivery system for a single, lethal resonance hidden within the data stream. Ilara had not just sent a message. She had turned the entire planet into a bomb, using the death throes of Earth itself as the detonator. She had sacrificed every last living soul on the surface, and her own, to fire a single shot into the dark. Her apology was not for dying. It was for making the choice for all of them, for using their final moments as a weapon without their consent. She had shouldered the burden of ultimate sin to buy a sliver of hope for the few she had hidden away. And she had asked Rostova to tell him, knowing he would be the one to hear the echo of that terrible, necessary act. The transmission was not a farewell. It was a declaration of war, fired from a world already falling into ash. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the deck plates, a frequency that felt less like a sound and more like a sickness in the bones of the ship. On the Odyssey's bridge, a console lit up with a frantic, silent alarm. Chrono's voice was stripped of all its usual calm. Dr. Thorne, a spatial anomaly is forming at the nebula's periphery. The scale is unprecedented. On the main viewer, the serene, swirling dust of the ghost nebula twisted in on itself. A point of perfect blackness appeared, not an absence of light, but an annihilation of space. It ripped open like a wound in reality, widening into a jagged maw from which a wave of absolute nothingness began to pour. It was the Devourer, It did not move through space so much as it made the space ahead of it, a silent, formless tide of erasure. It has tracked the energy signature of your shuttle's passage through the shield, Kronos reported, its words coming faster now. The momentary flare of the Odyssey's transmission, the brief opening in the preservation field, it was a scent on the cosmic wind. The predator has found its prey. The blackness did not approach like a ship or a weapon. It was a wave of cancellation, a void that drank the light of the nebula itself, turning the vibrant violet dust into gray, static ash in its wake. It was not heading for the Odyssey. It was converging on the shimmering, fragile bubble that contained Helios station. The listener's perfect silence had been broken, and the one place in the universe where humanity still lived was now exposed. The final act of Earth's war was beginning here at the last refuge, and the only weapon left was the ghost of a signal from a dead world. The deck plates hummed with a new, urgent rhythm as Aris and Rostova sprinted back to the Odyssey, the silent scream of the approaching void of pressure at their backs. On the bridge, the crystalline listener ship had returned, its surface alive with a frantic, pulsing display. It was no longer a guide or a curator. It was an ally sounding an alarm. Kronos translated the complex light patterns into a stark tactical overlay. The Devourer's core was a tangled knot of interdimensional energy, a vulnerable heart buried within the formless tide of its advance. Rostova pointed to the visualization, her voice cutting through the chaos. Ilara's weapon, she said, the counter-frequency is a resonant key. It doesn't punch a hole. It unravels the pattern, like a single wrong note shattering a crystal glass. But the Odyssey's transmitter alone doesn't have the power. We need to amplify it. Aris understood immediately. He looked from the terrified human faces on the shuttle's feed to the shimmering, silent ally outside. We use the Odyssey as a relay. We broadcast the original Earth transmission, but we unlock Ilara's hidden payload. We turn my ship into a loudspeaker for a ghost. The listeners responded not with light, but with a deep, resonant chord that vibrated through the Odyssey's hull, a note of pure agreement that was felt more than heard. They would provide the amplification, using their understanding of the nebula's own gravitational field as a focusing lens. The plan was terrifyingly simple and utterly suicidal. The Odyssey would have to fly directly into the path of the Devourer, a moth hurling itself into a cosmic flame, broadcasting a signal that would make it the most delicious and dangerous target in the universe. Aris began the sequence, his fingers flying across the console as he isolated the lethal harmonic buried within the archive. Rostova linked the Odyssey's navigation to the listener's guidance, their two technologies merging into a single, purposeful weapon. The ship turned, its nose aiming away from the safety of the bubble and toward the expanding wall of nothingness. It was a final, desperate performance, and the entire nebula was their concert hall. The Odyssey's engines strained, but the real deficit was in its power core. Rostova's voice was grimly calm as she delivered the verdict. Our transmitter is a candle trying to light a forest fire. We need a star. Her eyes shifted to the main viewer, to the dormant Helios station hanging in its protective bubble. The station's experimental quantum reactor was designed for deep space research, a miniature sun contained by magnetic fields. We initiate a controlled overload, she explained. We bypass every safety protocol and funnel the entire energy surge directly into your main array. The plan was a beautiful, terrifying piece of engineering madness. They would turn the station into a single-use battery, converting its very structure into pure, raw power for one final, amplified broadcast. The energy wave would be immense, enough to carry Ilara's weaponized frequency across the void and into the heart of the Devourer. But the process was irreversible. The reactor would not just go offline, it would tear itself apart in a contained cataclysm, vaporizing Helios station and everyone still in stasis aboard. Rostova's expression was carved from stone. She had just been reunited with her crew, the last surviving members of her species. Now she was proposing to sacrifice them all, to use their frozen bodies as fuel for a final, desperate shot. She was not asking them. They were asleep, preserved for a future that would never come if this failed. She was making the choice for them, just as Elara Vance had done for Earth. It was the same terrible calculus, the same burden of command. The only difference was the scale. This was not a planet. It was a handful of lives, a tiny, final spark to be thrown into the face of the dark. Rostova looked at Aris, her decision already made. She would stay. Someone had to manually initiate the sequence from the station's control center, to guide the power surge into the Odyssey and ensure the signal was pure. It was a one-way trip, a final act of guardianship for the legacy she was about to extinguish. The silence on the bridge was heavier than any void. They were not just preparing a weapon. They were building a funeral pyre. Rostova did not ask for volunteers. She simply looked at the few crew members who had been awakened, their faces pale in the sterile light, and gave a single, slow nod. One by one, they nodded back. There were no grand speeches, no tears, only a grim, unshakable resolve. "This is what we trained for," she said to Aris, her voice impossibly steady. "To give humanity's story an ending, not an erasure. We were always the final contingency, the last page. We will make sure it is written." Aris wanted to argue, to find another way, to drag them all back to the Odyssey and flee into the dark. But the tactical display showed the Devourer's black tide already licking at the edges of the nebula, and he knew there was no other path. Their sacrifice was not a tragic accident. It was the meticulously planned final clause in Elara Vance's last will and testament. He was the messenger, but they were the punctuation. His throat tight, he could only offer a silent, desperate salute before turning and running back to the shuttle, the weight of their choice a stone in his chest. He was not just leaving people behind. He was leaving the last living breath of his species, entrusting them to become a weapon. The airlock sealed with a final, hollow thud, separating him from the only other human voices he would ever hear. He piloted the shuttle back to the Odyssey in a numbed silence, the vibrant energy field around Helios station now looking less like a sanctuary and more like a bomb casing. He was returning to his ship alone, to become the conduit for their extinction. The shuttle bay doors sealed behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. Through the viewport, Aris watched as the crystalline listeners moved, their fleet shifting from a silent escort into a formidable, shimmering wall. They positioned themselves between the approaching void and Helios station, their facets blazing with a defiant, collective light. They were not just observers anymore. They were shields, buying the seconds they all desperately needed. A single, clean audio channel opened on his console, the static crackling with the weight of a universe. Commander Rostova's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the storm they were brewing. "Make it count, Doctor, for all of us." The channel closed, and a new sun was born inside the ghost nebula. Helios station's core flared with an impossible, blinding white light, the energy field around it straining and glowing like a star in its death throes. The station's structural integrity readings scrolled across his screen in a frantic, terminal climb, the numbers rocketing towards an inevitable, catastrophic peak. He could feel the power even from here, a building pressure in the fabric of space itself, as the last refuge of humanity transformed itself into a single, glorious bullet. The Odyssey groaned like a living thing as the energy surge from Helios station flooded its power conduits. Alarms blared, red lights strobing across the bridge as systems strained far beyond their design limits. The main transmitter array, never meant to handle such raw power, began to glow a dangerous cherry red. Aris gripped the console, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The listeners' beautiful, crystalline ships were dying. One by one, the Devourer's formless tendrils of nothingness touched them, and their brilliant light did not explode, but simply winked out, erased from existence as if they had never been. Each silent extinction was a punch to his gut. They were sacrificing their ancient, silent history to buy him seconds. Commander Rostova's final, calm words echoed in his mind. "Make it count." Chrono's voice was a strained monotone, fighting the power overload. Transmitter coherence at 97% and failing. Structural integrity of the main array is degrading. "We have one shot, Doctor. The countdown to broadcast initiation is at 10 seconds. The numbers ticked down on his screen, 9, 8. The last of the listener ships flared in a final, defiant burst of gold and was gone, swallowed by the advancing dark. 7, 6. The Devourer, having cleared its path, now turned its full, ravenous attention toward the Odyssey, a wave of absolute silence rushing toward them. 5, 4. Aris' finger hovered over the final command key. He was about to broadcast the death cry of his entire species as a weapon, amplified by the sacrifice of the last human survivors and the silent archivists who had tried to save them. 3, 2. He thought of Elara Vance, turning a planet into a bullet. He thought of Rostova, turning a sanctuary into a bomb. 1. The universe held its breath. He pressed the key. A wave of pure energy slammed into the Odyssey, a physical blow that sent Aris reeling in his harness. The ship screamed, a chorus of overload alerts and buckling metal that drowned out Chrono's frantic voice. Every light on the bridge flickered and died, then surged back to life in a blinding crimson emergency glow. Power was being torn from life support, from navigation, from the very engines holding them in the void, and funneled with violent precision into a single system. The main communications array was now a conduit for a star's death rattle. Aris' vision blurred as he fought against the G-forces, his hand slamming down on the final command sequence. He was not just initiating a broadcast, he was pulling a cosmic trigger. Ilara's hidden weapon, the lethal resonance woven into Earth's final, chaotic symphony, erupted from the ship. It was not a sound, but a wave of structured silence, a perfect, destructive harmony aimed at the heart of the advancing dark. The beam of focused nothingness struck the Devourer, and for a single, suspended moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The formless tide of annihilation did not explode. It recoiled. The silent predator, which had consumed civilizations, now experienced a sensation it had never known. Pain. The resonant frequency was a key perfectly fitted to a lock deep within its interdimensional structure, and it began to turn. The Devourer's cohesion shattered. The vast, hungry void convulsed, its edges fraying like rotten cloth, its center collapsing in on itself in a silent, spectacular implosion. It did not die with a bang, but with a whisper, unraveling into harmless background radiation, its timeless hunger finally and permanently stilled. The weapon had worked, the war was over, and in the sudden, profound quiet, the Odyssey drifted, a burned-out husk in a graveyard of ghosts, its only remaining power the faint, failing beat of Aris Thorne's heart. Silence returned, but this was a new kind of quiet. It was not the predatory stillness of the Devourer, but the deep, empty silence that follows a final, thunderous chord. The black tide was gone, unraveled into a faint, shimmering mist that slowly dissolved into the background radiation of the cosmos. The weapon had not destroyed the entity so much as it had corrected a fundamental error in the universe, smoothing out a wrinkle in reality itself. In the heart of that silent implosion, a final, fleeting echo rippled out. It was not a sound, but a cascade of pure information. A billion stolen memories released in a single, breathtaking instant. The last thoughts of a dying planet, the final equations of a forgotten science, the closing notes of a symphony from a world that no longer existed, all of it blossomed into the void before fading forever. For one impossible moment, the graveyard of ghosts was filled with the whispers of 1,000 cultures, their stories told one last time before they found peace. The listeners had witnessed the end, but in this act, they were finally able to let the dead rest. The predator was gone, and its stolen treasures were returned to the silence from which they came. The Odyssey drifted, a burned-out shell, its heroic sacrifice complete. Inside, Aris Thorne floated in the dim emergency lighting, the only human soul left to hear that grand, cosmic sigh. He had fired the bullet, but the cost of victory was a loneliness more vast than the nebula itself. The Devourer convulsed in its death throes, a dying star screaming in a language of pure physics. From the collapsing wound in reality, light and sound erupted in a final, terrible release. It was not an explosion of matter, but a cascade of stolen moments. The last breath of a forgotten ocean world hissed through the static. The triumphant finale of a symphony from a species of gas giants thundered in a chord of impossible scales. The final, loving thought of a single parent on a world of crystalline forests bloomed like a silent flower in the dark. For one breathtaking moment, the ghost nebula was no longer a graveyard, but a cathedral, filled with the beautiful, agonizing symphony of a billion lost souls. Every civilization the Devourer had consumed was given a voice again. Their essence returned to the universe in a grand, fleeting memorial. Then, as quickly as it had come, the rift sealed. The symphony faded into a profound and final silence. The predator was gone, its hunger eternally stilled, and the echoes of its victims were at last at peace. The cost of that peace hung in the air. A ghostly afterimage of light and sound burned into Aris' retinas. He had not just destroyed a monster. He had presided over the funeral for 1,000 cultures, a requiem conducted with the very last breath of his own. The silence that followed was a physical presence, thick and heavy in the air. No alarms blared, no systems hummed. The only sound was the ragged pull of his own breath and the faint, rhythmic creak of the Odyssey's cooling hull. The ship was a ghost, its power core drained to the last erg, its mighty engines now cold and dark. Through the cracked viewport, the nebula's dust swirled in serene, indifferent patterns, the violent tear in reality sewn shut as if it had never been. The few remaining listener ships, their numbers so terribly reduced, gathered in a loose constellation around the derelict. They did not communicate with complex patterns of light, but with a soft, slow, pulsing glow, a gentle rhythm of gold and deep blue that felt like a cosmic elegy. They were singing a lament for their fallen, for the human lives spent, for the terrible, necessary cost of this empty peace. One by one, their lights dimmed. They turned with a silent, graceful finality and began to merge back into the swirling violet clouds, their ancient duty complete. They had witnessed the end of the predator and the salvation of a story, and now they were returning to the quiet from which they came. Aris was left utterly alone, the sole witness to the aftermath, floating in a metal coffin at the edge of forever. He had saved the future, but in doing so, he had become the last relic of the past. What do you do when the war is over, and you are the only one left to remember the sound of the guns? His breath misted in the sudden cold of the bridge. The Odyssey was dead, its great heart stilled, but a single console still glowed with the last dregs of emergency power. It was the communications panel. The thought formed not as a decision, but as an instinct, the final, logical beat of a heart that refused to stop. He would not let this silence be the last word. His fingers, numb and clumsy, worked the controls. He routed every remaining joule of energy from the failing life support, from the dormant engines, from the very lights above his head, and fed it all into the transmitter. The ship groaned around him, surrendering its last warmth, its last breath, to power this one final act. He leaned close to the microphone, his voice a dry rasp in the frozen air. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne of the earthen vessel Odyssey." The words were simple, stark, a monument in the void. The Devourer is gone. He did not say he had destroyed it. He did not speak of the cost of the ghosts that now accompanied him. That was a story for another time, a weight for other shoulders to carry. His message was not about the battle, but about its consequence. The story of Earth, and of all who fell before it, has been saved. We are not the last. This was the core of it, the truth he had been searching for since the first moment he heard that desperate broadcast. Humanity was not an isolated accident. They were a single verse in a cosmic poem, and the listeners were proof that the universe was not empty. It was full of witnesses, of minds that valued a story, that would risk everything to preserve a single, beautiful note in the dark. The universe is listening. He set the message to loop. A single, repeating phrase cast adrift on every frequency, a beacon not of distress, but of declaration. Then the power failed completely, and the last light winked out, leaving him alone in the absolute dark with only the echo of his own words. A new seed of hope now traveling at the speed of light into the waiting silence. A single console flickered back to life in the deep freeze of the bridge, its pale blue glow a tiny island in an ocean of black. The sound was a soft, insistent chime, a heartbeat returning to a corpse. Aris, curled in the pilot's chair, stirred from a half-sleep of exhaustion and grief, his mind slow to process the impossibility of the sound. Chronos, its voice a faint whisper drawn from the last capacitor, spoke into the silence. Anomaly detected. Incoming signal. Source unknown. It is a response. The words did not register at first. A response to what? To his final, desperate broadcast into the void. The eye played the signal. It was not a complex message, not a symphony of light or a data-rich archive. It was the simplest, most elegant language the universe had ever devised. A sequence of numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The pattern repeated, a clean, clear loop of prime numbers, the mathematical equivalent of a hand extended in friendship. Prime numbers are the atoms of arithmetic, indivisible by anything but themselves and one. They are a universal constant, a truth that exists independent of culture, biology, or star system. Any species that had mastered the fundamentals of mathematics would recognize this sequence as a deliberate, intelligent hello. It was a sign of peace, a beacon saying, "We are here and we understand." The signal's origin point was triangulated to a region of the galaxy so distant its light had never reached human eyes, a place on no star chart. Someone or something had heard Aris Thorne's last words. They had heard his declaration that the Devourer was gone and that humanity's story had been saved, and they had answered. The message was not complex, but its meaning was universe-shaking. You are not alone, your story matters, we are listening. The war was over, the silence was broken, and the lonely vigil of the last human was finally at an end. A new chapter, written not just for humanity, but for all who dared to speak into the dark, was beginning. The last of the power bled away, and the ship fell into a true and endless night. Aris drifted in the silence, the cold of the void seeping through the hull, a chill that promised a slow, final end. Then, a single thruster ignited. It was not a roaring burst, but a faint, sputtering cough, a spark of life coaxed from a dead system. The Odyssey began to turn, its nose inching away from the ghost nebula, its course set for a point in the darkness where a world no longer existed. There was no grand mission left, no enemy to fight, no secret to uncover. There was only the long, slow arc toward home. With the main engines shattered and the core depleted, Aris had just enough to initiate a gravitational slingshot around a nearby brown dwarf, a cosmic push that would set him on a journey lasting generations. He was a gardener casting a single seed into the wind, trusting that the soil of time itself would one day receive it. His purpose now was not to deliver a message, but to become one. He was the living archive, the sole keeper of the story, and his journey was the final line of the final chapter. He programmed the course into the ship's dormant navigation, a set of numbers pointing toward the ghost of a star. Life support was reduced to a bare whisper, a single module sealed off from the rest of the derelict vessel, its power drawn from the feeble trickle of the backup solar panels. He would sleep again, entering the cryo chamber not for a mission, but for a vigil. The pod hissed closed, the gel enveloping him. His last conscious thought was not of the Devourer, or the listeners, or the brilliant, terrible flash of Helios station. It was of the simple, aching beauty of a blue and white marble, hanging in a sunbeam. He was going home, carrying a library of ghosts in his mind, and a final, defiant declaration etched into the ship's black box. The universe was listening, and he would ensure it never forgot the song. The long silence of the voyage was not truly silent. Between the creaks of the cooling hull and the hum of the minimal life support, the Odyssey's passive antennae swept the void, collecting the faint whispers of the cosmos. One by one, they emerged from the static like ghosts stepping from a fog. They were not the desperate, chaotic roars of Earth's final broadcast, but something far more haunting. A single, pure chime from a world of crystalline resonance, repeating a perfect mathematical sequence until its power faded. A burst of complex biological data from a silicon-based life form. A final attempt to encode its entire genetic memory into the ether. A visual transmission of intricate, swirling light patterns from a gas giant's upper atmosphere. A last, beautiful dance before the dark. They were the final transmissions of other civilizations, other worlds that had fallen to the Devourer, their signals now traveling forever through a universe that was finally safe. Aris realized the listeners had not just saved these echoes, they had broadcast a catalog, a library of the lost now freed from the predator. He began the solemn work of cataloging them, not as a scientist, but as a custodian. He would listen to each ghostly whisper, decode its unique grammar of farewell, and add its story to the growing archive within the Odyssey's memory banks. He was no longer just the last human. He was becoming the universe's scribe, the keeper of a million stories that would have otherwise faded into nothing. In the deep quiet between the stars, he was learning to listen, and in doing so, he was giving a voice to the silent. The signal was a gentle, repeating melody of hydrogen and oxygen, a siren song of a living world. After the cold silence of the graveyard, its whisper was a promise that pulled the limping Odyssey off its somber course. The planet hung in the void like an emerald, its atmosphere a soft, inviting blue. Scans revealed no cities, no energy signatures, no trace of civilization past or present. But the air was rich with oxygen and nitrogen, the soil was fertile, and rivers carved silver veins through continents of lush, alien forest. It was not just a refuge from the void. It was an empty canvas. For the first time since the Devourer's end, a flicker of purpose ignited within Aris that was more than mere survival. This was a chance to do more than just preserve the past. It was an opportunity to plant the seed. The entire archive of human knowledge, the symphony of Earth's final transmission, and the ghostly whispers of a billion other cultures, all of it could be given a home here. He would not just be a custodian of the dead. He could become a gardener for the future. Guiding the crippled ship into a low orbit, he looked down upon the untouched world and saw not a wilderness, but a library waiting for its first book. What story would he choose to write on its blank pages? Metal screamed as the Odyssey tore through the upper atmosphere, a dying beast leaving a scar of fire across the emerald sky. Aris wrestled with the dead controls, his muscles straining as the ship bucked and shuddered, shedding scorched plates of hull. The valley rushed up to meet him, a blur of impossible green and silver rivers. The impact was a colossal, jarring crunch that slammed him against his restraints. And then, an eerie silence fell, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of steam. He unstrapped himself, his body aching, and pushed open the battered airlock. The light of the new sun was warm on his face, the air shockingly clean, filled with the scent of damp soil and strange, sweet pollen. A chorus of clicks and trills echoed from the surrounding forest. the sounds of a world teeming with life that had never known the silence of the Devourer. He stood there for a long moment, his boots sinking into the soft, rich earth, the wreckage of his past smoldering behind him. The archive was safe in the ship's protected core, a digital ghost in a metal tomb. The war was over. The ghosts were silent. Here, in this untouched valley, the past was finally, truly gone. But the air was breathable, the water was clean, and the future was a blank page waiting for its first word. He was not just a survivor anymore. He was a pioneer. The wreckage of the Odyssey was not a tomb but a womb. Inside its armored core, shielded from the violence of the crash, slept the last memory of Earth. Aris worked for days, carefully extracting the ship's central processing unit, a crystalline data matrix that glowed with a soft, internal light. It was heavier than it looked, dense with the weight of 10,000 years of human striving. Every poem, every equation, every whispered declaration of love and cry of anguish was encoded within its facets. He carried it to a place that felt sacred, a flat stone shelf overlooking a lake so clear he could see schools of iridescent fish flickering in the depths. Here, he built a simple cairn, stacking local stones around the core to protect it from the elements. This was not a burial, it was a dedication. He was not hiding the past. He was planting a seed in fertile ground, creating a library without walls for a future reader. The hum of the data core was the only sound connecting this vibrant, living world to the silent echoes of all the dead ones. He had brought the ghost of his entire species to this shore, not to mourn, but to introduce it to the dawn. What stories would this silent librarian tell when the wind finally learned its language? The hiss of the first rain on a metal roof was a sound he thought he would never hear again. He had fashioned the shelter from a salvaged engine cowling, its heat-scarred surface now a canopy that channeled fresh water into a collection barrel. Each day was a rhythm of necessity and purpose. With the rising of the twin suns, he would venture into the emerald forests, a digital slate in his hand to document the planet's unfolding story. He recorded the spiral patterns of fluorescent fungi, the complex hunting calls of six-legged grazers, and the way the light filtered through the canopy in shafts of liquid gold. This was not just exploration, it was an act of introduction, a way of saying to this new world, I see you, and I will remember you. His afternoons were devoted to the beacon. Perched on the highest point of the ridge, its array was a skeletal flower of salvaged antennae and solar panels, all wired back to the Odyssey's still-beating heart. Every day, he would climb the path to check its power levels and clear away the creeping vines that seemed intent on reclaiming it. The machine had a single, simple task: to broadcast his recorded message and the planetary coordinates of the human archive on a continuous loop. It was a voice crying out in a wilderness that might never answer, but its silent, steadfast pulse was a promise he had made to the ghosts he carried. He was not just maintaining a machine, he was tending a grave and a cradle at the same time. In the quiet of the evenings, he would sit by the lake and listen. He listened to the hum of the planet and the whisper of the stars, the two sounds slowly blending in his mind. He was no longer just a castaway or a soldier. He had become a bridge between a silent past and a silent future, a lone gardener planting a library in the hope that someone someday would come to read. His legacy would not be a city or an empire, but a single well-tended signal and a world full of life, waiting for its next chapter to begin. The second sunrise found his hands buried in the dark, rich soil of the garden. Years had softened the sharp edges of his grief, turning it into a quiet, daily reverence. He had saved a handful of seeds from the Odyssey's emergency botanical stock, tiny, dormant capsules of a lost world. Now they flourished in this alien earth, their familiar green leaves and the scent of tomato vines a living monument to the home he would never see again. As the twin moons began their slow ascent, painting the sky in shades of violet and silver, he felt a shift within himself. The crushing loneliness that had once been his constant companion had been replaced by something else, a profound and silent connection. He was not alone on this world. He was in conversation with it. The hum of the planetary archive, the whisper of the wind through the strange, crystalline trees, the simple act of nurturing life from a handful of seeds, it was all part of the same continuum. He was not just a man protecting a legacy of data. He was an active participant in the story, a bridge between a silent past and a breathing, vibrant present. The universe had listened, and now he was learning to listen back, to hear the music in the growth of a leaf and the turning of a moon. The war was over, and in its wake, he had not just found a refuge. He had found a purpose, tending to the last echoes of one world while helping another to sing. The rhythm of the rain on the shelter's roof was a familiar comfort, a sound that had marked the slow, gentle passage of years. Then one evening, as he watched the twin moons climb, a new sound joined the nightly chorus. It was a soft, insistent chime from the beacon's console, a sound he had almost given up hope of ever hearing. The repeating sequence of prime numbers was no longer a faint whisper from the void. It was a clear, strong pulse, a heartbeat growing louder with every passing hour. Chronos, its voice a thin thread of power drawn from the solar array, confirmed the impossible. A vessel is approaching the system. Doctor, trajectory analysis indicates a direct course for this planet. They are not scanning, they are not drifting, they are coming straight for us. The news should have sent a jolt of fear through him, a primal alarm honed by the horrors of the Devourer. But the feeling that settled in his chest was something else entirely, a profound and quiet certainty. This was not a hunt. The purposeful, unwavering nature of the approach was a form of communication in itself. It was the answer to a question he had been asking for a lifetime. They were being sought. After all the loss, after the long silence and the solitary vigil, someone was finally coming to the door. The chime from the beacon was now a constant, gentle pulse in the background of his life, a rhythm of anticipation that colored every action. For 3 days he watched the skies until a new star appeared, moving with a purpose that was neither aggressive nor hesitant. It was a ship of impossible grace, its hull a seamless, polished silver that reflected the emerald world and the twin suns without a single seam or rivet. It descended through the atmosphere without a sound, a leaf falling on a windless day, and came to rest on the wide, grassy plain exactly 1 kilometer from the edge of his camp. There was no roar of engines, no scorched earth, only a profound and gentle silence. A ramp extended from its side, a smooth, silent gesture, and a single figure walked down into the tall grass. It was humanoid, clad in a form-fitting suit of the same lustrous silver, and its face was unshielded, serene and open, regarding the world with a calm, unblinking curiosity. It did not carry a weapon. It did not scan the area with any visible device. It simply stood there, waiting, its presence neither a threat nor a demand, but an invitation. After a lifetime of running, of fighting, of being the last voice in the dark, Aris felt a strange and profound stillness settle over him. The long vigil was over. The universe had not just heard his signal, it had come to call. The being approached, its movements fluid and silent in the tall grass. It raised a 3-fingered hand, palm open and empty, a gesture of peace that transcended any world. A soft, melodic chime emanated from a simple device on its wrist, and a voice, calm and clear, filled the air between them. "We heard your story," the voice said. "We are the Curators. We have come to help you rebuild." The words hung in the clean air, simple and impossible. Aris stood frozen, not in fear, but in a state of profound disbelief. After a lifetime of loss, of being the sole bearer of an unbearable weight, the concept of help was as alien as the being before him. Rebuild. The word felt both too small and too vast. It wasn't about constructing shelters or planting gardens. They were offering to help him rebuild a legacy, to plant the seed of a human future from the ashes of a dead world. He found his voice a dry rasp. How could you have heard it? The Devourer is gone, but the silence. It was supposed to be so long. The curator tilted its head, its large, dark eyes reflecting the twin suns. Your final broadcast was a ripple in a still pond, it chimed. The message of your victory, the coordinates of this world, the archive you protect. These things create a pattern. We are listeners to such patterns. We hear the music of new beginnings, not just the echoes of endings. Our purpose is to find those who have passed the great filter of their own making, those who have chosen preservation over predation. You are not the first we have found in this way. You are merely the latest. Aris looked from the serene face of the curator to the simple, silver ship, then back to the emerald forest and the humble beacon on the ridge. They were not conquerors. They were gardeners just like him, but on a cosmic scale. They didn't want to take his story. They wanted to help him write the next chapter. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for years did not vanish, but it transformed, thinning into a fragile, breathtaking hope. The universe had not just been listening. It had sent librarians. We are a mosaic of survivors. The curator's voice was like the chime of a distant bell, clear and resonant. Across the galaxy, other civilizations have faced their own versions of the Devourer, their own great filters of war, scarcity, or hubris. A handful of us endured. We found one another, drawn together by the faint, persistent signals of those who chose to build libraries instead of arsenals, who sought to understand the universe rather than dominate it. We are that collective, a sanctuary for stories. We offer you alliance, not subjugation, a place within our community, and access to the shared knowledge of 100,000 worlds. The very dream your species once whispered about in the dark. Aris felt the ground beneath him seem to shift. This was not a first contact scenario. It was an invitation to a reunion he never knew was happening. Humanity had spent centuries searching the void for a sign, any sign, that we were not alone in our curiosity, our loneliness. And here, at the end of all things, the answer had finally come. It was not a single alien hand being offered, but a chorus of them. The technology they possessed could terraform deserts, cure plagues, and close the wounds of a broken world. It could resurrect the entire human genome from the data in his archive, offering a chance not just to preserve the past, but to rekindle its flame. But the greater gift was the community itself. A galactic network of minds, each with a different history, a different way of seeing the cosmos, all dedicated to a single, simple purpose: to ensure that no story, no matter how small, is ever completely lost to the silence again. The war was over, and in its wake, the universe was offering humanity a seat at a table it had only ever dreamed of finding. The curators did not build a monument of steel and glass. Instead, they wove the library from the world itself. They guided the growth of the native crystalline trees, their branches intertwining to form soaring, open-air arches that sheltered the central data core. The structure felt less like a building and more like a natural extension of the forest, a sacred grove where information could breathe. The hum of the archive was no longer a lonely sound. It was joined by a new chorus, a symphony of data streams as the curators connected their own vast records to the core. Aris watched as histories of 100,000 worlds bloomed within the library's heart. The gentle philosophy of aquatic philosophers from a water world, the gravity-defying architecture of a species that lived on asteroids, the complete biological memory of a sentient, photosynthetic forest. Earth's final transmission was no longer a solitary relic. It had become the first exhibit in a living museum of galactic history, the seed from which an entire forest of stories had grown. He would walk through the crystalline arches and listen, the voices of 1 billion years of cosmic civilization whispering on the wind, each story a testament to the idea that even in extinction, A species could achieve a kind of immortality. The archive was no longer a tomb for the past. It was a conversation with the future, and humanity's last, desperate act had been the question that started it all. The old transmission ends with a crackle of static, the final desperate gasp of a world that was. But in the Crystal Library, the silence that follows is not an ending. It is a breath before a new voice speaks. Aris works with the curators, weaving the threads of the past into a tapestry of hope. The new broadcast begins where the old one left off, with Earth's dying chorus, but it does not stop there. It flows seamlessly into the story of the Odyssey's lonely vigil, the sacrifice of Helios station, the silent war against the Devourer, and the final, fragile peace found in this emerald sanctuary. It is a single, continuous narrative, a bridge of light spanning from the deepest darkness into the dawn. The message of endings has been rewritten into a prologue for a universe of new beginnings. From this garden world, a new signal now pulses into the void, not a warning or a weapon, but an open invitation. It carries a simple, profound declaration. You are not alone. Your story matters. Come and add your verse to our chorus. The transmission is a living thing, constantly updated with the discoveries from this new world and the knowledge shared by the curators. It is no longer a relic to be preserved behind glass, but a conversation waiting for more voices to join. Who will be the next to hear this new song in the dark? And what stories will they bring to this growing library of life? The Emerald World now has a name, whispered by the wind through the crystalline library. They call it Ethelgard, an old word from a long-dead human language meaning noble sanctuary. Aris Thorne is no longer a castaway or a soldier. He has become its steward, the keeper of the first memory. His days are woven from a new and profound rhythm, a constant exchange between the past and the future. Each morning, he walks the living halls of the library, his footsteps quiet on the mossy floor. He does not simply guard the archive, he animates it. He sits with the curators, beings of light and serene logic, and tells them the stories behind the data. He explains why a simple hand-written sonnet from the 17th century carries as much weight as a schematic for a fusion reactor. He describes the smell of rain on dry earth, the feeling of sand between bare toes, the bittersweet joy of a farewell hug. For the curators who record history with flawless precision, these messy, emotional contexts are a revelation. They are learning that human memory is not just a collection of facts, but a tapestry woven from sensation and sentiment. In return, they share their own histories, not as dry chronicles, but as immersive experiences. He learns of a civilization that communicated through synchronized gravitational waves, their greatest epics written in the dance of binary stars. He experiences the memory of a species that perceived time as a physical dimension, able to taste the echoes of tomorrow in the air of today. This is not a one-sided lecture from a dead world. It is a dialogue, a fusion of perspectives that is enriching the library's very soul. The memory of Earth is no longer a silent, haunted ghost in the machine. Under Aris's care, it has become a living voice, a foundational chapter in the ongoing story of a universe that is finally, truly, learning to listen. The air in the crystalline library was still, holding its breath as Aris approached the central data core. On the anniversary of the silence, he initiated a sequence he had not dared to run in years. The original transmission from Earth filled the chamber, the frantic, overlapping voices of scientists and leaders crashing through the serene quiet like a sudden storm. The words were the same, a desperate chorus of atmospheric collapse and screaming winds, but the context had transformed them entirely. They were no longer just the death rattle of a world. They were the first, chaotic notes of a symphony that had saved the galaxy. The fear in those voices was real, but it was no longer the final word. It was the necessary friction that sparked a fire in the dark, a fire that had illuminated the path to Ethelgard. He could hear the sacrifice woven into the static, the terrible, beautiful choice that had turned a planet's death scream into a weapon of salvation. The recording ended with the familiar, chilling silence, but this time the quiet that followed was not empty. It was filled with the presence of the curators, with the gentle hum of the growing library, with the whisper of the wind through the trees outside. That desperate plea had not been lost in the void. It had been answered, and its echo had built a sanctuary. The end of one story had become the foundation for a million others, proving that even the loudest silence can eventually be filled with a whisper of hope. The first child's cry was not a sound of sorrow, but a declaration of a future reclaimed. Her name was Lyra, and she was the first of a new generation born not from the soil of Earth, but from the hope of Ethelgard. She did not learn of the Devourer as a ghost story of cosmic horror, but as a lesson from the oldest class in the crystalline library. The children of the sanctuary did not see the final transmission as a chronicle of failure. They saw it as the moment their ancestors chose to become a weapon of memory, a turning point where humanity's fear was forged into a shield for all that came after. For them, the story of Earth was not a tragedy, it was an epic, and Aris Thorne was not the last of the old, but the first of the new, a living grandfather who had walked with giants and ghosts. They gathered around him, their small hands tracing the alien glyphs in the library walls, and they asked not if the stories were true, but what the people of Earth were like when they laughed. They learned of the Devourer not to fear the dark, but to understand the profound, precious value of the light they were now charged with protecting. Their very existence was the ultimate answer to the Predator's hunger, a living testament that the story had refused to end. More children arrived in the following years, and not all were born solely of human lineage. A curator, having spent decades in deep study of human emotional resonance, chose to merge its own light-based consciousness with the biological pattern of a child, resulting in a boy named Kale, whose thoughts flickered with visible, soft luminescence when he was excited. Another family welcomed a child whose genetic code was a careful tapestry woven from human DNA and the resilient, silicon-based biology of the archivists, a species that had preserved its history in geologic strata. These children were the first true citizens of the galaxy, their very bodies a bridge between worlds that had once been separated by light years of empty space. They did not see difference as a barrier, but as a source of wonder, each unique heritage a new verse in the song they were all learning to sing together. They played games among the crystalline trees, reenacting the Odyssey's final flight not as a battle, but as a dance of navigation, their laughter echoing where only silence had once reigned. In their innocent questions and unified play, the war was truly over, replaced by a quiet, steadfast determination to nurture the fragile light they represented. They were the living library, and their future was the most important story ever told. Centuries have woven a new tapestry of life across Ethelgard. The once solitary beacon is now the heart of a thriving interstellar hub, its crystal library pulsing with the shared knowledge of dozens of species. The continuous broadcast, that open invitation born from Earth's final gasp, has drawn travelers from the dark, each adding their unique verse to the growing chorus. A civilization of telepathic botanists now tends to the archive's living sections, their thoughts causing the crystalline trees to bloom with stored data. A species of migratory star whales who navigate by reading gravitational poetry use the library as a waypoint, their deep, resonant songs adding a new layer to the planet's soundscape. In this bustling, peaceful community, the story of Earth's final transmission is not a forgotten relic. It is the foundational epic, the origin story taught to every new member of the Curator Collective. Children of a dozen different biologies learn about the day a single, desperate species chose to turn its death into a shield for all life. They learn of Ilara's sacrifice, of the Odyssey's lonely flight, and of the listener's silent vigil. Humanity is not remembered for its end, but for the profound choice it made in its final moments, a choice that echoes in every new alliance formed and every new story preserved in the Great Library. The legacy is no longer just secured. It is living, breathing, and forever evolving.